The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on Eleanor Lockhart's frail body as she collapsed beneath a lone cottonwood tree, her strength finally giving out after days of desperate travel. The baby in her arms, just 6 months old, wailed with a hunger that tore at Eleanor's heart more painfully than her own empty stomach. Wyoming Territory, 1878, was unforgiving to a widow with nothing but the clothes on her back and a child to protect. Quinn Jameson heard the cry before he saw them. He'd been tracking a stray heifer when the sound, thin and desperate, carried on the hot summer breeze. Reining in his horse, he followed the cries until he spotted them, a woman lying motionless in the tall prairie grass, her baby squirming beside her, face red with hunger and distress. Quinn dismounted quickly, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. At 28, he'd seen his share of hardship in the West, but the sight before him twisted something deep in his chest. The woman's face was streaked with dust and tears, her dress torn and dirty. The infant, wrapped in what looked like its mother's shawl, had worked itself partially free and was crying with diminishing strength. "Madam," Quinn called, approaching carefully. When she didn't respond, he knelt beside her, checking for signs of life. Finding a weak pulse, he sighed with relief. She was alive, but barely. Without hesitation, Quinn shrugged off his worn leather coat and gently scooped up the crying baby, wrapping it securely. The infant quieted slightly at his touch, large blue eyes fixing on Quinn's face with a desperate trust that humbled him. "It's all right, little one," he murmured, his voice low and soothing. "I've got you now." Shifting the baby to one arm, Quinn reached for his canteen. He dampened his bandana and pressed it gently to the woman's parched lips. After a few moments, her eyelids fluttered. "My baby," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Right here, madam," Quinn assured her, showing her the bundle in his arm. Safe and sound. Relief flooded her face before her eyes closed again. Quinn knew he had to act fast. The woman needed medical attention, and the baby needed food. His ranch was too far, but Benton was just over the next rise, a small but growing cattle town where he occasionally did business. "Madam, I need to get you and your little one to town. Can you hold on if I put you on my horse?" She nodded weakly, and Quinn worked quickly. He helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her, holding her steady with one arm while cradling the baby with the other. He clicked his tongue, and his stallion began moving at a careful walk toward Benton. As they rode, Quinn felt the woman's body occasionally sag against him. "Stay with me, madam," he urged. "What's your name?" "Eleanor," she whispered. "Eleanor Lockhart. My son's name is William. I'm Quinn Jameson. You're going to be all right, Mrs. Lockhart. Both of you." Eleanor tried to keep her eyes open, but exhaustion and hunger were taking their toll. "My husband," she murmured. "Gone. Bandits on the trail. 3 days ago." Quinn's jaw tightened. He'd heard about a stagecoach robbery near the territorial line. It seemed Eleanor and her baby were survivors of that attack. "Don't you worry about anything now," Quinn said firmly. "I'm taking you to Doc Parker in Benton. He's a good man." As they crested the hill, the small town of Benton came into view. It wasn't much a main street with a general store, saloon, small church, and a handful of other buildings, but it had what they needed most: help. Quinn rode straight to Doc Parker's office, calling out before he even dismounted. The doctor, a gray-haired man in his 60s, came rushing out, taking in the situation with one glance. "Bring her inside," he directed, holding the door open. Quinn carried Eleanor in first, laying her gently on the examination table. "She's been out in the elements for days. Document dehydrated for sure. Her baby needs milk. Dr. Parker nodded, already examining Eleanor. "Martha," he called to his wife. "We need milk for an infant, quickly." While the doctor tended to Eleanor, Quinn paced the small waiting room with baby William in his arms. The infant had stopped crying but whimpered occasionally, his tiny fist wrapped around Quinn's finger. "You've had a rough time, haven't you, little man?" Quinn murmured. "Don't you worry. We'll get you fixed up." Martha Parker hurried in with a bottle of warm goat's milk. "Here," she said, handing it to Quinn. "Poor little mite looks half-starved." Quinn sat in a chair by the window and offered the bottle to William, who latched onto it desperately. As the baby drank, Quinn felt something shift inside him, a protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed. "How's his mother?" he asked when Dr. Parker emerged from the examination room an hour later. She'll live, the doctor said, wiping his hands. Dehydration, exhaustion, some bruising that suggests she fell multiple times. She told me bits and pieces before she fell asleep. Her husband was killed in that stage robbery we heard about. She's been walking toward Benton ever since, carrying that baby. Quinn shook his head in amazement. She's stronger than she looks. Most women are, Dr. Parker replied. The question is, what happens now? She has no money, no family that she's mentioned. Quinn looked down at William, now sleeping peacefully in his arms. She can stay at my place until she's back on her feet. I've got that small cabin near the main house, the one my ranch hand used before he moved on. Dr. Parker raised an eyebrow. That's mighty generous, Quinn. It's what anyone would do, Quinn replied, though they both knew that wasn't necessarily true. Not everyone in Wyoming territory would take responsibility for a widowed mother and her infant. She needs at least a day of rest here, Dr. Parker said. Come back tomorrow afternoon. Quinn nodded, carefully handing William to Martha. I'll bring some supplies from my ranch, and I'll let Sheriff Davis know about what happened to her husband. The next day, Quinn returned to town with a wagon loaded with provisions. He'd spent the morning preparing the cabin for Eleanor and William, cleaning, airing it out, even bringing in wildflowers to brighten the small space. He wasn't entirely sure why he'd gone to such trouble, but something about Eleanor's courage and determination had struck a chord in him. At Dr. Parker's office, he found Eleanor sitting up in bed, looking markedly better than the day before. Some color had returned to her cheeks, and she was holding William, who was contentedly nursing from another bottle. Mr. Jameson, she said when he entered. Dr. Parker told me what you did. How can I ever thank you? Quinn removed his hat, suddenly feeling awkward. No need for thanks, Mrs. Lockhart. Just glad I was riding by when I was. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. William and I would have died out there if not for you. Quinn shifted uncomfortably. Well, that didn't happen, and it's not going to. Dr. Parker says you can leave today, and I've got a place for you to stay while you recover if that's agreeable to you. Eleanor looked uncertain. I couldn't impose. It's no imposition. I've got a small cabin on my ranch that's sitting empty. It's yours for as long as you need it. Why would you do this for strangers? She asked, her voice soft but direct. Quinn considered the question. My pa raised me to believe that helping folks in need isn't charity, it's duty. Besides, he added with a small smile, this little fellow and I have already become acquainted. He reached out a finger, which William immediately grabbed. Eleanor studied Quinn's face. At 24, she'd already seen enough of the world to know that kindness often came with conditions. But something in Quinn's clear gaze told her she could trust him. Thank you, she said finally. We'll try not to be a burden. You won't be, Quinn assured her. My ranch is 10 miles outside of town. It's not much, but there's plenty of space and fresh air. Good place for a boy to grow up, he added, then immediately wondered why he'd said it. The Lockharts wouldn't be staying that long. By mid-afternoon, they were on their way to the Jameson ranch. Eleanor sat beside Quinn on the wagon seat, William sleeping in her arms. The Wyoming landscape stretched around them, vast skies above rolling grasslands dotted with sagebrush and occasional stands of cottonwood trees. It's beautiful, Eleanor murmured, taking in the scenery. Different from Illinois. That where you're from? Quinn asked. Eleanor nodded. My husband Thomas was a clerk in Chicago. He inherited some money and decided we should seek our fortune in California. We were on our way there when. Her voice trailed off. Quinn gave her a moment before speaking. I'm sorry about your husband. Sheriff Davis is sending telegrams to try to track down the gang that did it. Thank you, Eleanor said quietly. But I don't expect justice. Not out here. The law's reaching farther every year, Quinn said. This isn't the wild territory it once was. Eleanor glanced at him. You've been here a long time? Born and raised in Wyoming. My father established our ranch 20 years ago. He passed 3 years back, and I've been running it since. Alone? Quinn smiled slightly. Just me and a couple of ranch hands who help with the cattle. It's not a big spread, but it's good land. As they approached the ranch, Eleanor could see what Quinn meant. It wasn't one of those massive operations she'd heard about, but it was well-maintained, a main house built of sturdy logs, a large barn, corrals for horses, and grazing land stretching into the distance where cattle dotted the landscape. There's your cabin, Quinn said, pointing to a small structure about 50 yards from the main house. It's modest, but solid. Stove works fine. Eleanor felt tears threatening again at his kindness. It looks wonderful. Quinn helped her down from the wagon, then carried her meager belongings into the cabin while she followed with William. Inside was simple but clean: a main room with a table, chairs, and a stove, a small bedroom with a neatly made bed, and even a cradle. Where did that come from? Eleanor asked, nodding toward the cradle. Quinn looked slightly embarrassed. It was mine when I was a baby. Been in the attic for years. Thought William might use it. Eleanor gently laid William in the cradle, watching as he stretched in his sleep. Mr. Jameson, Quinn, please. Quinn. I don't know how long we'll be able to stay. I have almost no money, and I need to find work so I can continue to California or go back east. No need to worry about that now, Quinn said firmly. You need time to recover, and William needs his mother healthy. There's plenty of food in the cupboards and a cow that gives more milk than I can use. Take the time you need. Before Eleanor could protest further, he tipped his hat. I'll leave you to settle in. Dinner's at 6 at the main house, if you feel up to joining me. If not, I understand. After he left, Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the sudden turn in her fortune. Just yesterday, she'd been certain she and William would die on the prairie. Now they had shelter, food, and the protection of a man who seemed genuinely kind. What do you think, William? She whispered to her sleeping son. Should we trust him? William sighed in his sleep, his tiny face peaceful for the first time in days. That evening, Eleanor decided to accept Quinn's dinner invitation. She washed and changed into her one-spare dress, which was wrinkled but clean. After feeding William and ensuring he was settled in his new cradle, she made her way to the main house. Quinn answered her knock immediately, as if he'd been waiting near the door. You came, he said, sounding pleased. Thank you for the invitation, Eleanor replied, suddenly nervous. It had been a long time since she'd been a guest in someone's home. The inside of Quinn's house was surprisingly comfortable. Eleanor had expected a bachelor's sparse quarters, but there were well-crafted furniture pieces, bookshelves filled with volumes, and even a few pieces of artwork on the walls. My mother's influence, Quinn explained when he noticed her looking around. She insisted a home should look like people live in it, not just exist. She had good taste, Eleanor commented. She'd be pleased to hear you say so. She passed 6 years ago. I'm sorry. Quinn smiled gently. She lived a good life. Come, dinner's ready. He'd prepared a simple but hearty meal: roast beef, potatoes, and fresh vegetables from his garden. Eleanor was surprised again. You cook, she observed. Quinn chuckled. Don't sound so shocked. A man living alone either learns to cook or eats poorly. As they ate, Eleanor found herself relaxing for the first time in weeks. Quinn was easy to talk to, asking about her life before the journey west, but never prying when she was reluctant to elaborate. He told her about his ranch, his hopes to expand his herd, and the challenges of ranching in territory that was rapidly changing. More settlers every year, he said. The open range won't be open forever. Does that worry you? Eleanor asked. Quinn considered the question. Change is inevitable. The smart ranchers are adapting, buying land, establishing clear boundaries. The days of free grazing are numbered. You seem philosophical about it. My father taught me that fighting the tide just gets you drowned. Better to learn to swim in the new currents. After dinner, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in spectacular hues of orange and pink. Eleanor felt a pang of guilt at how peaceful she felt, considering her husband had been dead less than a week. I should check on William, she said, rising from her chair. Of course. Quinn stood as well. Thank you for the company, Eleanor. The way he said her name, soft and respectful, made her feel both comfortable and unsettled. Thank you for dinner. And for everything else. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Eleanor focused on regaining her strength and caring for William, who was thriving with regular meals and peaceful surroundings. Quinn went about his ranch work, giving Eleanor space but always making himself available if she needed anything. In the evenings, they often shared dinner, their conversations growing longer and more personal as trust developed between them. Eleanor learned that Quinn had never married, though there had been a sweetheart years ago who'd chosen city life over becoming a rancher's wife. Quinn discovered that Eleanor had been a schoolteacher before her marriage, with a particular love for literature. "I miss books," she admitted one evening. "Thomas allowed me to bring only essential items for our journey." The next day, Quinn appeared at her cabin with a stack of books from his own collection. "Not sure if these are to your taste," he said, placing them on her table. "But you're welcome to them." Eleanor ran her fingers over the spines: Dickens, Twain, even some Shakespeare. "These are wonderful. Thank you." As June turned to July, Eleanor began helping around the ranch, tending the vegetable garden, assisting with meals when Quinn's two ranch hands, Hank and Josiah, came in from the range, and even learning to milk the cow. She insisted on contributing, despite Quinn's protests that she was still recovering. "I've never been one to sit idle," she told him firmly. "Work is good for the spirit." Quinn couldn't argue with that. He'd been raised with the same belief. One evening, as they sat on Quinn's porch watching a summer storm roll across the plains, Eleanor finally broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "I need to decide what to do next," she said quietly. "William and I can't impose on your generosity forever." Quinn looked at her, his expression unreadable in the gathering darkness. "You're not imposing. Even so, I need to make plans. Find work somewhere." Lightning flashed across the sky, briefly illuminating Quinn's face. He seemed to be struggling with something. "There's work here," he said finally. "The ranch needs a good cook and housekeeper. Hank and Josiah have been suffering my cooking for too long, and I've been thinking of expanding, maybe adding some sheep. That would mean more hands, who'd also need feeding." Eleanor stared at him. "Are you offering me a job?" "Yes," Quinn said, then added hastily, "with proper wages. And you and William could stay in the cabin. It would be a business arrangement." "A business arrangement," Eleanor repeated, feeling both relief and an unexpected disappointment. "That's very kind." "Think about it," Quinn said, rising as the first raindrops began to fall. "No need to decide tonight." Over the next few days, Eleanor considered Quinn's offer carefully. On one hand, it solved her immediate problem, providing income and continued shelter for herself and William. On the other hand, it meant abandoning the plans she and Thomas had made for California. But California had been Thomas's dream, not hers. She'd agreed because that's what wives did. They followed their husbands' leads. Now, Eleanor wasn't sure what her own dream was anymore. What she did know was that Benton was beginning to feel like a place she could belong. She'd met people in town who'd been kind to her: Martha Parker, who'd shown her where to find the best prices on fabric; Sheriff Davis, who'd kept her informed about the search for Thomas's killers; even Mrs. Jenkins at the general store, who always slipped a piece of candy into William's tiny hand. And then there was Quinn, steady, reliable Quinn, who never pressed her for more than she was willing to give, but was always there when she needed him. She'd seen how he was with William, too gentle and patient, making the baby laugh with silly faces when he thought Eleanor wasn't looking. A week after Quinn's offer, Eleanor gave him her answer while they were washing dishes together after dinner. "I'd like to accept your job offer," she said, handing him a plate to dry. "If it's still available." Quinn's face brightened. "It is." "I have conditions," Eleanor continued. "I want fair wages, not charity. And I'd like Sundays free to attend church in town." "Done," Quinn agreed without hesitation. "Anything else?" Eleanor hesitated. "I'd like to plant some flowers around the cabin. Make it a bit more homelike." Quinn smiled. "Plant all the flowers you want. The cabin is your home, now yours and William's." As summer progressed into fall, Eleanor settled fully into her role on the ranch. She cooked meals that had Quinn's ranch hands singing her praises, kept the main house spotless, and even began teaching Josiah to read during evening lessons. William grew stronger every day, crawling everywhere and beginning to pull himself up on furniture. Quinn expanded his operations as planned, adding a small flock of sheep and hiring 2 more hands to manage them. The ranch prospered under his careful management, and Eleanor took pride in being part of its success. Their evenings together became a cherished ritual. After William was asleep, Eleanor would join Quinn on his porch or by his fireplace, depending on the weather. They would talk for hours about books, about the day's events, about their hopes for the future. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, enjoying each other's company. Neither spoke of the growing feelings between them. Eleanor still wore her wedding ring, and Quinn respected the boundary it represented. but sometimes their hands would brush while passing a book or a cup of coffee, and the electricity between them was undeniable. One crisp October afternoon, Sheriff Davis rode out to the ranch with news. The gang responsible for the stagecoach robbery had been captured in Montana Territory. Thomas Lockhart's pocket watch and wedding ring had been recovered. "Thought you might want these back," the sheriff said, placing the items in Eleanor's trembling hands. "The trial's set for next month in Helena, if you want to attend." After he left, Eleanor sat on her cabin steps, the tangible reminders of Thomas heavy in her palm. Quinn found her there, staring at the items. "You all right?" he asked softly, sitting beside her. "I don't know," Eleanor admitted. "I should feel something more, shouldn't I? Relief? Closure? But all I feel is numb." Quinn didn't offer platitudes. Instead, he simply placed his hand over hers, enclosing the watch and ring in their joined grasp. "Grief doesn't follow rules," he said finally. "There's no right way to feel." Eleanor leaned slightly against his shoulder, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I've been thinking that I should go to the trial, to see justice done for Thomas." Quinn nodded. "If that's what you need to do, I'll make sure everything is taken care of here." "Would you?" Eleanor paused, gathering her courage. "Would you come with me? I don't think I can face it alone." The request surprised Quinn. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Eleanor said simply. "I'm sure." The journey to Helena took 3 days by train. Quinn arranged for Hank's wife to care for William, assuring Eleanor that the baby would be well loved in her absence. Though it pained her to leave her son, Eleanor knew this journey was necessary, a final duty to the man she had married. During the trip, Quinn was a constant source of support. He handled the travel arrangements, ensured Eleanor had comfortable accommodations, and stood beside her as a silent pillar of strength during the difficult testimony about the robbery and murders. On the night after the verdicts were delivered guilty on all counts, with sentences of hanging for the 2 men who had actually pulled the triggers, Eleanor sat with Quinn in the hotel's small dining room. She'd been quiet throughout dinner, processing the day's events. "Thank you," she said finally, looking up at him across the table. "For everything." Quinn shook his head. "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do," Eleanor insisted. "Not just for coming here, but for all of it. For finding us that day. For giving us a home. For—" Her voice caught. Quinn reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "Eleanor." In that moment, something shifted between them. The careful distance they had maintained for months collapsed under the weight of emotions too strong to ignore any longer. "I think it's time I stopped wearing this," Eleanor said quietly, slipping Thomas's wedding ring from her finger. She placed it carefully in her handbag. "He would want me to live, not just exist." Quinn's eyes never left hers. "And what do you want, Eleanor?" "I want to go home," she said softly. "To Benton. To the ranch. To you." The return journey seemed both endless and too brief. A new awareness hummed between them, a recognition of feelings long suppressed but now acknowledged. They talked more openly about their growing attachment, careful with each other's feelings but honest about their hopes. "William needs a father," Eleanor said as the train crossed into Wyoming territory. "And I need a family," Quinn replied. "I've been alone too long." When they arrived back at the ranch, William greeted his mother with squeals of delight. At 8 months old, he'd grown noticeably in the week she'd been gone. He reached for Quinn too, babbling happily when the rancher lifted him high in the air. That night, after William was asleep, Quinn walked Eleanor back to her cabin. At the door, they paused, both reluctant to end the evening. "Eleanor," Quinn began, then stopped, seeming to search for the right words. Eleanor saved him the struggle. Rising onto her tiptoes, she pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief but full of promise. "Good night, Quinn," she whispered, slipping inside the cabin before he could respond. The next morning, Quinn appeared at her door with a small bundle of late wildflowers. "These aren't much," he said, "but I wanted to do this properly." Eleanor invited him in. William was playing on a blanket on the floor, chewing contentedly on a wooden toy Quinn had carved for him. "I'm not a man of fancy words," Quinn said, setting the flowers on the table. "But I know what I feel. I love you, Eleanor Lockhart. I love William too. I want you both to be part of my life, not as my housekeeper and her son, but as my wife and our boy." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Are you proposing?" Quinn smiled, taking her hands in his. "I reckon I am. Not very elegantly, but sincerely." "Then I accept," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite her tears. "Not because I need security or protection, but because I love you too." They were married 2 weeks later in Benton's small church. The entire town turned out for the ceremony. Even crusty old prospectors who rarely left the hills came down to see Quinn Jameson finally take a bride. William, dressed in a new suit Martha Parker had helped sew, was passed around among the ladies during the celebration afterward, basking in the attention and growing sleepy from all the excitement. Sheriff Davis offered a toast at the reception held in the town hall. To Quinn and Eleanor, proof that even in this hard country, love finds a way. As winter settled over Wyoming, the Jameson ranch adjusted to its new dynamic. Quinn officially adopted William, giving the boy his name and his unconditional love. Eleanor transformed the main house with small touches that made it truly a home: curtains at the windows, quilts on the beds, and always fresh flowers or greenery, even when she had to force bulbs indoors during the snowy months. They weathered their first challenges together: a blizzard that threatened the livestock, Quinn's brief but frightening bout with pneumonia, William's first serious fever. Each difficulty only strengthened their bond, proving that they were stronger together than apart. By spring, Eleanor had news that brought Quinn to his knees in wonder when she told him. "A baby," he whispered, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby," Eleanor nodded, covering his hand with hers. "Due in October." Quinn gathered her into his arms, mindful of her condition even in his excitement. "William will be a big brother. He'll be wonderful at it," Eleanor said confidently. William, now 14 months old, was a happy, sturdy boy who followed Quinn everywhere, wearing a miniature hat that matched his father's. As Eleanor's pregnancy progressed through the summer, Quinn insisted on hiring more help for the ranch so she wouldn't overexert herself. Eleanor protested at first, but eventually appreciated the assistance, especially as her energy waned in the August heat. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching William chase fireflies in the yard, Quinn turned to his wife with a serious expression. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "Something important." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "That sounds ominous." Quinn chuckled. "Not at all. It's about the future. Our future and the children's." "I'm listening." "Wyoming territory is changing," Quinn explained. "They're talking about statehood in a few years. Women already have the vote here, first place in the nation. I'm thinking we should be part of building what comes next." "What do you mean?" "I want to expand the ranch, but not just for cattle and sheep. I'm thinking about what this land could be for our family generations from now. A legacy." Eleanor considered his words. "You're thinking very far ahead. That's what happens when you have everything to live for," Quinn said, taking her hand. "Before you and William came into my life, I was just existing. Now I'm living, and I want to build something that lasts." "Whatever you decide, I'll support it," Eleanor assured him. "But remember that the most important legacy isn't land or buildings, it's the love we give our children." Quinn smiled, placing his hand on her rounded belly. "You're right, as usual. Speaking of which, have you thought more about names?" They spent the rest of the evening debating names for the new baby, their laughter carrying across the ranch as darkness fell. On a crisp October morning, almost exactly a year after Eleanor had removed Thomas's ring, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Quinn paced anxiously outside their bedroom while Martha Parker assisted with the delivery. When he was finally allowed in, the sight of Eleanor holding their newborn son nearly brought him to tears. "Come meet your son," Eleanor said, her face radiant despite her exhaustion. Quinn approached the bed reverently, sitting carefully beside his wife. She placed the swaddled infant in his arms. "He's perfect," Quinn whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. "What shall we call him?" They had discussed several options, but in that moment, Eleanor knew. "Benjamin," she said. "It means son of my right hand, because he completes our family." "Benjamin Jameson," Quinn agreed. "Welcome to the world, son." William, now almost 18 months old, was brought in to meet his brother. With Quinn's help, he gently patted the baby's head, then declared "mine" in his limited vocabulary. "That's right," Quinn told him. "Your brother. You'll always take care of each other." As winter gave way to spring and then summer again, the Jameson family flourished. The ranch prospered under Quinn's forward-thinking management. He invested in new breeding stock, expanded their holdings, and even experimented with new farming techniques to grow feed for the animals. Eleanor divided her time between caring for the boys and contributing to the ranch's success. She started a small school on the property for the children of their workers and neighboring ranches, beginning with just 6 students. Her classroom quickly grew to 15 children of various ages who rode in from miles around for Mrs. Jameson's lessons. William grew into a sturdy 3-year-old with his mother's thoughtful nature and his father's love of the outdoors. Benjamin, at 18 months, was already showing a determined personality that both challenged and delighted his parents. On the 3rd anniversary of the day Quinn had found Eleanor and William in the grass, the family held a special celebration. They invited friends from town and neighboring ranches for a barbecue and dance on their property. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit for dancing, Quinn pulled Eleanor away from the festivities for a private moment. "Do you remember that day?" he asked as they stood beneath the same stars that had witnessed their beginning. "Every detail," Eleanor replied. "I was certain William and I would die there." Quinn shook his head. "I think we were meant to find each other. Some things are just destined. I never took you for a romantic." "Quinn Jameson," Eleanor teased. "Only with you," he replied, drawing her into his arms. "Only ever with you." They rejoined the celebration, where William was attempting to teach Benjamin to dance, much to everyone's amusement. Sheriff Davis, now gray-haired but still sharp-eyed, approached them with a smile. "You've built something special here," he commented. "Not just the ranch, but this community." Quinn nodded. "Couldn't have done it without Eleanor." "Or you," Eleanor added. As the evening wore on, Quinn stood on the porch of their home, watching his family and friends celebrate. Eleanor joined him, slipping her arm around his waist. "Penny for your thoughts," she said. Quinn smiled down at her. "I was just thinking about how different things might have been if I hadn't heard William crying that day." Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder. "I believe we would have found each other somehow. Some loves are written in the stars." "When did you become the romantic one?" Quinn asked with a laugh. "You must be rubbing off on me," Eleanor replied. "After all these years together." "Not so many years yet," Quinn said. "We're just getting started." As if to prove his point, Eleanor shared a piece of news she'd been saving for this special day. "We might need to make more room in the house," she said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "By next spring." Quinn's eyes widened as her meaning registered. "Another baby?" Eleanor nodded, her eyes shining. "Another Jameson to help build that legacy you're always talking about." Quinn swept her into his arms, mindful of watching eyes, but too happy to care much about propriety. "I love you, Eleanor Jameson," he said fervently, "more with each passing day." "And I love you," she replied, "for finding us when we were lost, and for everything since." The music from the celebration carried on the summer breeze as they stood together, looking out over the land they'd made their own. From desperate beginnings on the harsh Wyoming prairie had grown a love that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead, a love as vast and enduring as the western sky above them. In the years that followed, the Jameson family continued to grow and prosper. Their 3rd child, a daughter they named Grace, arrived in the spring as predicted. 2 years later, they welcomed another son, Daniel. The ranch expanded to become one of the most successful operations in the territory. Eleanor's school evolved into Benton's first proper educational institution, with a dedicated building in town and 3 teachers, including Eleanor herself. Quinn served on the territorial council that helped guide Wyoming to statehood in 1890, proud to be part of the first state that guaranteed women's right to vote in its constitution. William, the baby who had cried out in hunger that fateful day, grew into a thoughtful young man with his mother's intelligence and his father's practical nature. When he was old enough to understand, Quinn and Eleanor told him the full story of how they had met, how his cries had brought them together and changed all their lives forever. "So if I hadn't been crying, you might never have found us?" William asked, wide-eyed at the tale. "Sometimes the most desperate moments lead to the greatest blessings," Quinn told him. "Remember that, son. Even in your darkest times, something wonderful might be just over the horizon." It was a lesson the Jamesons lived by, through good harvests and bad, through blizzards and droughts, through all the trials and joys that made up their extraordinary, ordinary life together. They never forgot that their love story had begun with a baby's cry, a cowboy's compassion, and a mother's courage, the perfect foundation for a family that would leave its mark on the Wyoming landscape for generations to come.